So history was just made for the crypto market and the industry as President Trump of the United States just signed in the Oval Office last night an executive order for a strategic Bitcoin reserve. And so this is huge. If you've not seen that yet, we're going to go ahead and take a look and watch it right now and listen in. It's just a few seconds long.
Today we're signing, and this is very historic, an executive order establishing a strategic Bitcoin reserve and
Right.
digital asset stockpile. This is a promise that you made throughout the campaign, and today we're keeping that promise. The reserve will be capitalized with Bitcoin that the federal government already owns, so it won't cost taxpayers a dime. This is like a digital Fort Knox for digital gold. And premature sales of Bitcoin over the past years cost American taxpayers over $17 billion in lost value because we didn't have a long-term strategy.
Right.
Now we do. So
And this is something you believe in.
100%, yeah.
Okay.
And the whole community believes.
Very good. Well, they made the promise, right?
Absolutely.
Okay.
All right. So that's really exciting because this represents a new era for the US officially as the US enters the Bitcoin accumulation race. And so that's pretty massive. Not only does President Trump sign it, but the president also has some backing from the US Secretary Treasury. And today on CNBC, he was actually interviewed about the Bitcoin and his thoughts on it with the upcoming plans. And you know what? Let's go ahead and listen to this as well.
The reserve. Supposedly there is disappointment that we're not going to be buying Bitcoin outright using taxpayer dollars. But if we can do it in a revenue neutral way, we would. Number one, were you a proponent for the reserve? And two, is there a way to buy Bitcoin, not just acquire it through, I don't know, however we've gotten these $17 billion worth at this point?
Yeah. So, Joe, I am a big proponent of the U.S. taking the worldwide lead in crypto. I think we have to bring it onshore and use our best practices and regulation. I think that the Bitcoin reserve, before you can accumulate it, you have to stop selling it. So what we have now is from a seized asset pool. And I wasn't there when it happened, but I believe what happened was about 500 million of Bitcoin was seized. Half of it was sold. And what we have now that say it's over 10 billion, 10, 12 billion, that's all through appreciation. So the first thing to do is to stop the selling. So we are going to, after the victims are paid and all of that, any seized assets will go into this reserve. And then we'll see what the way forward is for more acquisitions for the reserves. We're starting with Bitcoin, but it's an overall crypto reserve.
Right. So how do you think about buying though? And how should taxpayers think about that? Because effectively we'll be levering ourselves to some degree, given that we don't have a surplus of money right now to make these investments.
Yeah. So that's why the first step is to stop selling. And then we're going to put a plan in place from there. We're having this crypto summit. I'm going back to Washington this afternoon, and then we'll talk about the way forward.
So what you can see is exactly what people want to hear, Bitcoin holders and Americans in general. And so with that said, I'm going to go ahead and lay down around 6 key points of why this is important and what this actually means for Bitcoin. As you heard, the US currently holds around 200,000 Bitcoin. That's around $18 billion currently in their holding for the seed of the crypto reserve that they're going to start right now. Now, they don't own anything else, but you did hear that in the future, they do plan to strategize around having more assets in there. The first key fact is that the US becomes the first major Bitcoin holder for the government. Now, we do know that El Salvador has also had some stuff as well with this, but as far as a major government, major nation, it's the US, not a smaller nation like El Salvador. And this also instantly makes the US one of the largest Bitcoin holders globally. Okay, so with $18 billion worth of Bitcoin. Now, The good part about this as well, too, the second point is that there's a clear understanding of Bitcoin from the US government, right? The executive order explicitly calls Bitcoin digital gold and highlights its security and its scarcity. Scarcity meaning that there's only 21 million Bitcoin, as we know, and they're not all out yet. Of course, over the years, the block rewards will decrease, making it more scarce and more secure over time. There's a clear understanding of Bitcoin, knowing that it's scarce, knowing that you're not going to hack it, and calling it digital gold. And the government distinguishes Bitcoin from altcoins, focusing on an accumulation solely on Bitcoin at the moment. Now, there's the third component of this that you want to know is that there's a smart strategy for more Bitcoin. Now, notice that the Treasury Secretary talked and discussed that it's not going to cost taxpayers more money. And that's what you and I want to hear. We want to know that this strategic reserve and accumulating Bitcoin does not cost us more money because Bitcoin's currently almost $90,000 per Bitcoin. What would people think that knowing that? Of course, people who don't understand crypto, who don't know the history of Bitcoin, would certainly be against it. But overall, I agree that my taxpayers don't necessarily need to be increased to accumulate Bitcoin. We can use what we have. We can find ways around that without increasing taxes for people to increase the US government's strategic reserve of Bitcoin. It's budget neutral, as we just said, and it's a great balancing act, right? Critics can actually argue about the government spending, while Bitcoiners, of course, get an ongoing accumulation and love to see this. But again, critics aren't going to be able to really argue against this if it is budget neutral, bottom line. Now, another big key to this overall is that the global Bitcoin arms race begins, right? This puts pressure on other governments to accumulate Bitcoin, right? To start accumulating it overall. If China and Russia and everyone else sees the US doing this, then obviously they'll think there must be something more to Bitcoin. Maybe we need to do this as well, right? Bitcoin's fixed supply is 21 million, and meaning that countries actually have to act fast to accumulate Bitcoin. So that's a huge thing. Will this impact the price overall? Now, before we get to the next key takeaway, just know that the market actually initially dipped on this, okay? And so as you can see right now, we've just been going sideways. This is the daily chart. Let's go ahead and move down to the 4-hour, and you're going to notice that it's just compression right here. Lower highs, higher lows, compression, and really there's really uncertainty in the market, especially because the stock market at the moment has been going down with the tariffs, with the potential, are there going to be Fed cuts, the Fed cutting rates? We don't know quite yet. So there's a lot of uncertainty in the market, and the market doesn't necessarily like uncertainty. So stocks have been pulling back, which means Bitcoin has been going sideways, even though the news of a strategic Bitcoin reserve is bullish. So price did drop. There is some disappointment also, as well as you heard the Treasury Secretary talk about maybe some disappointment that we're not going to start accumulating or buying right away. We have to figure out what's going to be done about that. Sell the news, right? There was an initial discussion of buying opportunity, and that's why the market initially dropped. Now, the next key takeaway, though, is that this has a long-term impact, on crypto and Bitcoin in general, just because the US government is actually endorsing Bitcoin. It's one of the most bullish developments probably in crypto history, which is huge, an actual huge government. Two, states and foreign governments will likely follow, as we talked about earlier. Okay. So the long-term impact on this is huge. Bitcoin, this is a key right here, though. If you're watching this, understand that Bitcoin remains available to anyone and everyone, regardless of where you live, whether it's the US, whether it's Asia, whether it's Spain, Europe, Africa, it doesn't matter. India, Russia, Antarctica, it does not matter where you live. You can purchase Bitcoin right now. Individuals can actually front run future governments from accumulating Bitcoin buying now, knowing that it's a scarce asset. Now, at almost $90,000 per Bitcoin, it's not cheap. Most people don't even have $10,000, even $5,000 to spend or invest in an asset like this. So, knowing that, it is something that people also need to understand that you don't have to just buy one Bitcoin, which is really huge and it can go a long way. Now, think about that. If you only had $1,000 just a few years ago around COVID and you bought $1,000 worth of Bitcoin at $5,000, that's 20x. Your $1,000 has turned into $20,000. If you had $10,000 at that time and put that in there and bought two Bitcoin, it's now worth close to $180,000 to $200,000, depending on the fluctuation as things go this year. A little can go a long way. And so just know that. And if we continue to see Bitcoin like on the long-term chart, this is the long-term chart from 2010, 2011, up millions of percent, right? Each cycle from $1,000 to $20,000 to $60,000, now to over $100,000, we know that a Bitcoin strategic reserve makes sense. And so thinking that practically also as a personal investor, it also makes sense for a personal Bitcoin strategic reserve of your own finances if you can actually afford to invest in some Bitcoin long term. So again, as far as the returns on Bitcoin, they might not have a 20x, a 10x like they have the past few years, but we're potentially looking at Bitcoin in the next decade potentially hitting $1 million or more. That's over a 10x from here. That's a long-term investment, and that's why we talk about the United States having a Bitcoin strategic reserve long term. There's a long term impact, whether you're a government or whether you're an individual. And that's the next point that I wanted to get to you about. Now, and the last point simply is that Bitcoin is winning. It's called digital gold. And as we know for gold, we saw gold go from $1,800 to $3,000, and that took a decade. While Bitcoin, on the other hand, again, from 10 cents to $100,000. Bitcoin is the new digital gold. Bitcoin is winning. All the critics over the past 10 years, we've heard them say, Bitcoin's dead, Bitcoin's dead, it's a bubble. They've all been wrong. They've been proven wrong time and time again. So now we're at the point where we're seeing major governments accumulate Bitcoin. Bitcoin is winning despite the criticism, despite the resistance of people. It's been winning, and it's been a free market where anybody can buy, and which makes it very bullish for most people for the fact that there's no insider trading that was ever involved in this. It's always just been people who have been Bitcoiners who have believed in hard money, accumulate over time, and to see their long-term investments go up in value. And the biggest thing is that adoption is far from over, right? The job's not finished yet, as Kobe would say. We've seen that typically when one major government jumps into something, whether it's some type of technology or something financially, we've seen that for the US government to have a Bitcoin strategic reserve long term, it's bullish for adoption globally. And those are the key takeaways for today. And just really wanted to go over what happened in the last week as far as the Bitcoin strategic reserve. Even though they're not buying, the US government's not buying immediately, there are plans to buy in the future that is budget neutral. That's not going to cost taxpayer money to go up. So that's a huge win for the US government. That's a huge win for taxpayers. That's a huge win for Bitcoins globally as we continue to see adoption rise in the world and hopefully see other countries follow the steps of the United States. So that is just today's update. We will look at the charts more in the coming days as far as that goes. If you've not yet subscribed to the channel, make sure that you do that below. Go ahead and click that button, subscribe to get updated notifications. I'll talk more about the crypto White House summit, what's going on with that. There's a potential for no long-term capital gains on Bitcoin and crypto. Will that happen? So with that said, you're watching Ranger Crypto. You guys trade safe, and I'll talk to you soon.